And we will welcome once again Madame Sheila Fraser, the Auditor General for Canada. And you know the drill, Madame Fraser. You have a few minutes. The floor is yours.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Je suis heureux.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I am very pleased to be here to present my November 2006 report tabled last week in the House of Commons. Today I'm accompanied by Doug Timmins, Hugh McRoberts, and Ronnie Campbell, Assistant Auditors General.
Government activities, from the government system for managing spending, to public service ethics, to contract management, to programs that contribute to the health and well-being of Canadians. The report includes 4 audits that we had planned to report last spring. Because of changes to the parliamentary calendar as a result of the federal election, we deferred reporting them until now with an update of our audit findings. Let me begin with how the federal government makes decisions about spending public funds. The expenditure management system is at the heart of government operations because every government activity involves spending. Over the last 6 years, federal spending has grown from $162 billion a year to $209 billion. An effective system to manage spending is essential to getting the results the government wants and to being accountable to Canadians for what is done on their behalf. We found that the current system does not routinely challenge ongoing programs to determine whether they are still relevant, efficient, and effective. I am concerned that the system focuses on challenging new spending proposals and pays too little attention to ongoing spending. Also, in many cases, the distribution of funding is not aligned with what is needed to deliver the program. Finally, we found that departments rely more and more on supplementary estimates to get funding for some items instead of including them in the main estimates. This means that Parliament does not see the full range of proposed spending when it approves the annual spending plans. Le gouvernement revoit actuellement le
The government is reviewing the expenditure management system at this point, and I encourage it to resolve the weaknesses that we have identified. Good systems in themselves are not enough. They must be applied correctly and ethically. Departments and agencies can take several formal measures to ensure proper conduct. In Chapter 4, we examined key aspects of these measures in the RSCMP, Correctional Service Canada, and the Canada Border Services Agency. We found that these public safety agencies have ethics programs, but that many employees are not aware of them. Also, only about half of the employees believe their organizations would act on reports of misconduct, and many do not think those who report misconduct in the workplace are generally respected. It takes more than formal programs alone to encourage employees to report wrongdoing by colleagues. Employees have to be confident that management will take action on reports of wrongdoing.
Should demonstrate the highest ethical standards of integrity. When they fail to do so, public trust and confidence in government suffer. In Chapter 11, unfortunately, we do report one case of unethical behavior by a senior official, the former correctional investigator. The behavior we observed on the part of the former correctional investigator and the fact that it persisted over a long period of time and was not reported are extremely disturbing. This kind of conduct is certainly not typical of the public service, and I would caution all not to generalize from isolated examples to the public service as a whole. In my experience, the majority of public servants do adhere to the high standards expected of them. Dans le chapitre 9, nous examinons.
In Chapter 9, we looked at the problems related to the RCMP pension and insurance plans. These problems came to light only after employees complained. We found that the RCMP responded adequately to an investigation of abuse and waste, but we also found that broader issues remain. The RCMP needs to find a way to ensure that investigations of its actions are and are seen to be independent and unbiased. It also needs to assess the impact of a recent court decision on cases that warrant disciplinary action. In Chapter 3, we note that the federal government still has problems managing large information technology projects. These projects involve a lot of money, and it is important that the rules and processes in place for managing them be rigorously followed. In the last 3 years, the federal government has approved funding of $8.7 billion for new business projects with significant use of IT.
Managing large IT projects has existed since 1998, we found several of the same problems that we have reported in the past. Only 2 of the 7 large IT projects we examined met all the criteria for well-managed projects. The persistence of these long-standing problems is extremely troubling, not only because they involve large public investments, but also because of lost opportunities to improve business practices and services to Canadians. This report also includes 2 chapters on major contracts that had serious shortcomings in the way they were awarded and how they were managed. In Chapter 5, we looked at the handling of 2 contracts to relocate members of the Canadian Forces, the RCMP, and the Federal Public Service. In 2005, the program handled the relocation of 15,000 employees at a cost of about $272 million. Government contracts should be awarded through a process that is fair, equitable, and transparent. We found that these contracts were not, despite various warning signs. The request for proposals contained incorrect information, which gave an unfair advantage to the bidder who had the previous contract. The management of these contracts also had serious shortcomings, and members of the Canadian Forces have been overcharged for services provided to them. In Chapter 10, we found that the government failed to respect basic requirements in awarding and managing a major health benefits contract. This contract, worth millions of dollars, was awarded even though Public Works and Government Services Canada did not ensure that all the mandatory requirements were met. And for the next 7 years, Health Canada managed the contract without respecting basic financial controls. I am encouraged to see that the contract management issues in Health Canada have since been corrected. Nous avons aussi examiné la façon dont...
We also looked at how Health Canada allocates funding to its regulatory programs. In Chapter 8, we looked at 3 programs that regulate the safety and use of products commonly used by Canadians. Consumer products, such as cribs, medical devices, such as pacemakers, and drug products, such as prescription drugs. In an area so critically important to Canadians, Health Canada needs to know what levels of monitoring and enforcement its regulatory programs must carry out to meet its responsibilities, and what resources are needed to do the work. We found that Health Canada does not have this information and therefore cannot demonstrate that it is meeting its responsibilities as a regulator.
In Chapter 7, we look at how Indian and Northern Affairs Canada manages the treaty process with First Nations in British Columbia on behalf of the Government of Canada. The Auditor General of British Columbia also presented a report last week on the provincial government's role in the process. This treaty process is important to all Canadians. Among other things, it could help First Nations people in BC improve their standard of living, and it could result in significant gains to the economy. Since negotiations began in 1993, 1 final agreement has been initialed and 2 more are seen as imminent. However, no treaty has been signed and costs continue to grow. We found that the federal government needs to better manage its part in the BC treaty process. Negotiating treaties is complex, takes time, and can be very difficult. The government needs to take these challenges into account and rethink its strategies based on a realistic timeline. Dans le chapitre 6, nous faisons rapport sur le programme.
In Chapter 6, we report on the Old Age Security Program. Around 4 million people receive old age security benefits, amounting to about $28 billion a year. The number of beneficiaries is expected to double in the next 25 years. Errors that affect even a small percentage of clients can still represent a very large number and be very costly. We found payment errors in fewer than 1% of applications. We are pleased at this low rate of error. We are also pleased to see measures such as an outreach program and a simpler application process to make old age security more accessible to seniors.
We also looked at a case where the government created an obstacle to the effective operation of a foundation that it established to support its environmental goals. In Chapter 12, we noted that a clause inserted by the Treasury Board Secretariat in the government's most recent funding agreement with Sustainable Development Technology Canada prevented the board from making decisions in any given meeting where the majority of members present were federal appointees. Finally, 2 chapters of this report note that we were unable to audit certain aspects of government operations because we were denied access to information and analysis collected and prepared by the Treasury Board Secretariat. Public servants based their denial of access on a narrow interpretation of a 1985 order in council that spelled out our access to cabinet documents. After numerous discussions with government officials, the issue was finally resolved 3 weeks ago with the issuance of a new order in council that clearly acknowledges my need for access to the analyses performed by the Treasury Board Secretariat, and I thank the government for responding to our concerns. Ceci conclut notre introduction, Madame la Présidente.
This concludes our presentation, Madam Chair, and we would now be pleased to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Thank you very much, Auditor General, for coming here today. I want to focus on a particular chapter initially. There's quite a bit that we can talk about. Chapter 3 specifically with respects to large information technology projects. You indicated that there's been over the past few years expenditures about $8.7 billion worth of IT expenditures. And I do have some concerns that you raised because, as you're fully aware of, we've discussed very extensively in this committee accrual accounting and accrual budgeting on a going forward basis. And one of the issues that we raised during those discussions was with respects to IT systems and how they would merge and how they would assist in the financial reporting. And there seems to be an issue, not so much of system related, but a human resource issue. Can you clarify on that? Can you elaborate on that? Is it really an IT system or is it a human resource issue? Because I get the impression from what you've told us, it seems to be a lack of proper training, a lack of proper experience, a lack of proper recruiting. And is that correct? And how, if any, action has the government taken any to address that issue?
Thank you, Madam Chair. In that particular audit of was really the management of IT systems. The government has a framework in place. It has been in place for almost 10 years now, since 1998. And we would have expected government departments in introducing these large projects that involve a significant IT component to have followed that framework of management practices. And we found 2 main problems in the application of it. In the projects that we looked at. We looked at 7 projects. 2 were done well, the census and a project at the Canada Revenue Agency. The other 5 all had problems, and the 2 problems that were recurring was the first one was a lack of good business plan and proper planning up front, and in particular to show the eventual usage, who would be using these systems and what would be the benefits of it. And the second was organizational capacity. So getting back to the HR issue, that they didn't have the capacity, either the numbers or the skill set, to be able to deliver on the project with success. So there is an HR issue in the projects that we looked at.
And did there seem to be any indication that they have something in place to correct that, or a plan in place to deal with that?
Well, they certainly agreed with us that there should be more consideration given to this up front in the planning of these projects. But I think it would have to be done on a project-per-project basis. I'm not aware of any particular plan across government-wide. I know in the past that there have been certain plans to deal with, for example, the Y2K issue, and I think that was managed more centrally. But this is really specific projects in departments. And I think that one of the things that we point to in this chapter is that there needs to be a better upfront planning for these projects. There needs to be a better assessment of the HR skills and capacity within the department before they go ahead and start the projects.
So it's not even so much the management of projects that you raised as a concern, but you've also raised the notion of how they were awarded as well. And in your opening remarks, you stated that as well. So that these IT projects, first, how they're awarded, and secondly, how they're managed. When you said that there were shortcomings in the way they were awarded, I'm assuming you're talking about procurement practices. Is that correct?
The contracts, we have two chapters that deal with problems in awarding of contracts. They are not related, though, to IT projects. One is related to relocation of public servants, and another one is related to a health benefits contract.
And going back to the closing remarks that you made with respect to access to information, obviously when you were trying to understand, and I believe it's Treasury Board Secretariat that is responsible for oversight for IT projects that you alluded to, is that correct?
That's correct.
And that fact that they were responsible for oversight, that they denied you access to certain information because of the Access to Information Act. And then you've indicated that in the last few weeks that they were very forthcoming and they made the appropriate changes to allow you to get the appropriate information that you needed. Could you just elaborate a bit on that?
Let me just clarify. The Auditor General has right to access under the Auditor General Act. We are not limited by access to information, which is even more restrictive.
Yes.
So the Auditor General Act says that we have access to all information that we require to do our audits. In 1985, there was an agreement between the Office of the Auditor General and government on access to cabinet documents, spelling out which documents we were to receive, because obviously most cabinet documents are confidential in nature. And that order in council has served us well until this recent audits, where in the case of the IT projects, we wanted to look at the analysis that the Treasury Board Secretariat had done in their they play a role in this management framework and they challenge these projects, and we wanted to see these documents. Those documents were denied to us by public servants on the basis that it was documents, cabinet confidences of a nature that we could not receive. So it was their interpretation of the 1985 order in council. We disagree with them. We believe we should have received them.
Correct.
But we can obviously not see the documents, so it's hard to argue that we should get them because they're just being denied to us.
But very quickly, how would they be deemed to be cabinet confidence? It's just simply an analysis and looking at the particular projects. How is that
I think the
deemed to be
difficulty
cabinet
arises from the fact that this Treasury Board Secretariat, in fact, has two roles. One is Secretariat to Cabinet, and the other one is a management role. And this definition of what is cabinet confidence was, I think, broadened by bureaucrats, and they said that certain analyses were recommendations to cabinet, and so we could not access them. Now, we have worked with government, and there is a new order in council which was just issued at the beginning of about 3 weeks ago, which clarifies the issue going forward. But because of the change in government, there's also a convention that one government cannot release cabinet confidences of a previous government. So the documents that we were denied, we will never have access to. It's the problem, if you will, is resolved going forward, but we will never have those documents. They have been denied to us.
When you're saying that there was an issuance of an order in council that clearly acknowledges my need, could you expand on that? What specific needs will be met, or what access will you have, additional access will you have? Because that seems to be a bit broad term, and I just want to know the specifics.
The cabinet, the order in council actually spells out that we do have right to receive analyses prepared by the Treasury Board Secretariat. So it is more specific in outlining those documents.
Okay. So going forward, you clearly indicated that you will not have access to the previous documents that you had made requests for as well.
That's right. We will have access to Treasury Board analyses prepared from February 6, 2006 on. But as we mentioned in the report, very often our audits are retrospective in nature, and it is possible that going forward at some point in time, we would ask for documents prior to that. And should we ever again be denied access, we would have to report it to Parliament.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Madame Thibault.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Merci, Madame.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Madam Fraser, for your appearance here today with your staff. It is a pleasure to have you here. First off, you're saying that an effective spending system is essential in order for government to meet its objectives, to be accountable to the public for taxpayers' money. Of course, the government is the trustee for taxpayers, for citizens, and as an elected representative, I'm concerned here because once again you're telling us that we do not have, or you do not have the information that you need in order to carry out your duties. Based on the comment you made regarding the surplus and the fact that since the existence of surpluses since 1997, it would seem there's been some slippage as to the use over this period of the surplus. So I was wondering, is there a correlation that could be established there? From 1990 to 1997, this issue was not actually a concern. I didn't look at your predecessor's work, of course, but is there a relationship to be drawn between the fact that there's such a huge surplus, and this is not a political judgment that I'm making, although I might want to do that, but do you think that there is a correlation between the fact that we've seen this type of surplus over the years? So in a way, we're acting differently, and it's an irresponsible way to act in terms of the way the government should be managing public funds, taxpayers' funds. I don't think we indicated that as such in the report, but I would say that, yes, there is a correlation there between the fact that there is a surplus and the use of additional appropriations has increased in a period when there was no surplus. Obviously, there was a tightening of appropriation. There weren't that many additional projects being considered, and there was a very rigorous management of spending in a period of surplus. Of course, the expenditure management system was designed, in essence, for a period when there was a stricter control over expenditures and might not be adequate in an era of surpluses. And we've seen, for instance, that the fact that there's not a strict, rigorous examination of the ongoing spending. We're only looking at new spending, and new spending it was always in supplementary estimates. Correct me if I'm wrong, but that in and of itself is surprising. For new expenditures, there would be new programs, but these are not new programs that will exist only for on a six-month basis. These are going to be long-term programs, and supplementary credits supplementary appropriations are being used instead of incorporating them within the general expenditure budget. And I think, yes, I think it was a practice over a number of years to continue with the same expenditures, whether it's for the agencies or the departments, and we needed additional funds. We went through the supplementary appropriations estimates. I know that in my office, whenever the budget was presented, we knew that there was going to be supplementary estimates. So the idea of not adjusting the main estimates. The correlation that I'm making here is that it makes the work of parliamentarians all that much more difficult on the one hand, and on the other hand, we really do have to be extra vigilant because we have to find these things. And thank you. The evidence is clear based on the gigantic work that you've carried out on behalf of taxpayers. That type of work that the type of work that we would want to carry out as parliamentarians from all parties. It must be said that there was a time not that long ago when public servants and officials had to explain everything, their base, and they'd have to explain their A base. But now, none of these practices are carried out in the sense of having every person in the organization proving or giving evidence as to why that amount of money is needed. And because of government priorities, that is why I need this money. No, actually, it does happen when there are program reviews overall, but these are rather more specific programs from time to time, and we focus on new programs, new expenditures. They don't look into existing program spending, and when a new program is implemented, as to whether there was an existing program that should be abolished, changed in some way, or whether there's a relationship between the two. There's also a lack of performance or reviews or information as to being able to assess whether or not programs are still relevant, efficient, and effective. Because we do receive performance reports, don't we? And to establish those correlations, do you know if the Treasury Board Secretariat, how could I put it, either is not as rigorous as it should be or in carrying out its work, lax perhaps? I remember in the recent discussions we had with you, when we were considering another study, these people look very professional. They say they cannot do certain things. But in terms of this major role that they have to play, you'd have to ask them how come. I mean, they agree. They've undertaken to start their own process, and they want to change their expenditure management system to assess programs on a cyclical basis. That, of course, cannot all be done over the course of 1 year, but on a rotating basis, there should be a program assessment and review of expenditures, not only for new programs. My last question, do I still have a... Yes, thank you. With respect to the difficulties, I realize this dates back to 1997, but in the last two parliaments, we've had minority governments. Would that lead to us having the same type of situation we've experienced, in that you have a surplus and, on the other hand, consequently the way that surplus is spent, a new government, unaware of how long it will last and attempting to leave a mark, is that actually just going to perpetuate the state of affairs that we were looking at when I started my question that I referred to? It's a bit difficult for me to answer that. We haven't looked at the effect of minority governments, but overall, I would say that most ongoing programs are statutory spending, like old age security. That amount is going to be ongoing no matter what the changes are, but it has to be said that over the last fiscal year, I think part of the surplus was due to the fact that there were elections, and over an election period, you work on a warrant basis. I don't know what the term is in French for that, but you cannot have expenditures for new programs. So obviously there's a limit there. And on a 6-month basis, you would expect that a government would have new programs, additional spending, and that is limited, of course, in a period of elections. Thank you.
again. I noticed in your comments, of course, general knowledge to everyone. Maybe preface it with a comment. The old story, it's not what you make, it's what you spend. Whether it's personally, corporate control, and/or, of course, government. And I noticed our spending in the last 6 years has went from 162 billion to 209. Like just a significant increase in spending. And so with the, I suppose, duty and the responsibility of this committee as being an oversight committee, I don't think that there's, other than, of course, the little attention we paid to accrual accounting as being part of the process of oversight, but one of the main focuses of your latest report, of course, is managing this total, I suppose, I don't know the word I could describe our expenditure process, but it's just voluminous. It's huge. So managing that is crucial. My concern is we have weaknesses in the system, as you've identified. Do you see this as being more of an attitudinal weakness and/or a technical weakness, such as lack of equipment, lack of systems, or is it more of a human weakness in whether it's abuse of the political process, whether it has been staffing that are not up to par, etc. Where do you see the main glaring weakness?
That's an interesting question. I would say that there is a large part of it that would be classified as technical. I think the system was developed during a time of restraint, and so new spending got a lot of focus, and that system has continued on, and now we're in periods of surplus. The system needs to be adapted to reflect that. I think there's an underlying weakness in the system is that there isn't really good performance information. So government is now, is indicating they're also reviewing this and they want to make changes. I think it will take time before there is a really effective expenditure management system in place, just because the performance information isn't available now, and it will take some time to develop that. And it's hard to really assess programs if you don't have that information. So it will take time, I think, to modify the system so that there be a good challenge over existing spending. Some of the other issues, I think, the use of supplementary estimates, and that may in part be a question of timing. When do the main estimates come in? And so there could be issues like that as well that have to be looked at.
That's where I was going to. I took a look at actually on I believe it's page 38 of your report when you were comparing the supplementary estimates to the regular estimates for periods of surplus.
Tell us which, Mr. Cramp, can you tell us which chapter?
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm on the overview of the government's expenditure management system, November chapter. Chapter 1 and 2, and I'm on at page 38 actually. When you're comparing the expenditures to on main estimates versus supplementary during either the budget surplus period and or a budget deficit period, that gets away from the technical ability due to lack of IT technology, etc. But it gets back to the human decision, and that's where I've noticed the supplementary estimates went from 4.5% at the time of deficit up to 10%, and this gets me back to then this particular government's decision, and not wanting to play the political card here, but for many, many years the previous government just ran significant large surpluses. And the common complaint that seemed to go throughout the systems after, well, these then became discretionary pots, and so there wasn't enough attention paid to the expenditure control. Whereas if we are able to bring the surpluses down to a much more modest, simply a prudent level of surplus, then potentially we would not have that discretionary spending available for whether it's last minute, whether it's for electoral, whether it's for whatever particular gain, but we can get back to departmental spending, which would be much more stringently controlled and ideally confined to to the requirements of that department. Would that be, is that a fair statement in the direction the government should be going?
I think that's more of a political statement than a statement that can
Well, I apologize if I'm not trying to draw you into this argument.
I know.
But where I do want to go with this is I want to try to make a point, and if you concur, the government spending should be at the discretion of a regular parliamentary process, rather than simply what I call binge spending.
Well, the point we're trying to make, I think, is that when there is a significant portion of spending going through the supplementary estimates, parliamentarians, when they review the main estimates, are not receiving full information on spending in departments.
Okay.
There will always be supplementary estimates for a variety of reasons, and supplementary estimates are necessary. You have to have that ability to get additional funding as you go through the year. It's when the proportion becomes quite relatively large that then we become concerned that parliamentarians don't see the full picture.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I would like to go back to the point that Madam Thibault raised about the lack of cooperation, basically, that your department received when asking about the Access to Information Act. Was there any direct reason given to you other than just we just don't want to do this? Is there any specifics other than they cited a particular motion or a?
It was due to an interpretation of the 1985 Order in Council, which spells out what access we have to cabinet documents. And we were simply told that these documents that we were trying to get, the analyses that were done by the Treasury Board Secretariat, were cabinet documents of a nature not available to us. Now, the explanation doesn't go any further than that, because then they would have to obviously disclose what are in those documents if you want to have a more full.
So it wasn't just blacked out or anything like that. You were just told just not available?
We were given copies of, for example, reports with the pages all blacked out, and so it made the document essentially meaningless, or we'd get a title page and we wouldn't get the actual study. We take exception to the interpretation that was given, but there is no recourse for us except to report it to Parliament. And as I mentioned, this has been modified and clarified going forward.
Okay. Slipping over to the IT technology now. I can recall years ago, just as an example, I went to put a small IT system in just a small business that I was involved with, and I could have picked up the software for around $4,000 or $5,000, but I said, no, I want something personal that's really going to give me the results that I wanted and needed. 1 minute. And of course, before I knew it, I spent $50,000. And I said, my goodness. So then I went back, and it didn't work effectively, so I went back and put in and put in the $4,000 one. It's still working to this day in a magnificent fashion. So I say to myself, do we have some parallels to that simple parable in our IT acquisition? We have 7 systems. You've identified 5 that have not been exactly successful. I don't know if I have that number right. But there's a number of them that are not performing to the level that they should. Are we trying to be too inventive? And can we not go out to other jurisdictions where we have a technology that is now available, quote, off the shelf, tried, tested, true, ready to go, and not be going through such a waste of both capital in time and manpower?
There have been some cases that we've reported on in the past where departments tried to over-customize programs, but I think we have to recognize that from a starting point, given the complexity and the size of the federal government, there are very few other public administrations that would have the kind of systems. I mean, even abstraction from, for example, the census, there's Stats Canada is the only one that does this. So a lot of the systems are very specific, are very large. When you look at a system that, for example, for old age security that's handling $28 billion a year, there aren't many systems like that. Though And I do believe, and that would perhaps be something to question government about, I do believe that when they go into these projects, they generally try to see what is available. And our main concerns were with the business planning, and that would be obviously an aspect of that. What is the business plan complete before they start these things?
Much. Mrs. Nash.
Madam Chair, and good morning again to you. Madam Auditor General, appreciate all of your hard work to help us understand how government works. And I know for people, for Canadians who pay their taxes, they work hard for their money, they want to get the best value possible for the dollars that they send to our federal government. And I want to say, I guess, initially that while your job is to point out where there are deficiencies and where we need to do better, that there are a lot of things in government that work well and that Canadians do get good value for their money. But the key for us, obviously, is where there are huge amounts of money going into areas where there isn't proper accountability, that we do need to focus and improve on those areas. And the IT spending really jumped out at me, where you indicated there's been 8.7 billion approved for new business projects for the federal government over the last 3 years with significant use of IT. That's a large amount of money, and I know Mr. Cramp's example of an IT project on a small level gone awry. I know others have that experience. I also have the experience when I was newly elected, and the first office I looked at renting, a landlord had stars in their eyes at the thought of a big fat government check coming in, so he promptly beefed up the price, and I promptly walked away and went someplace else where I got a good deal. So I guess these are things that Canadians worry about, that we are getting good value for the money and that we do know what we're doing with the money. And what jumped out to me in Chapter 3 was when you said that most of these large information technology projects suffered from the same shortage of experienced and qualified people and inadequate analysis of key business issues as before. So this is a long-standing problem. And you found 4 of the 7 projects were well managed, but the quality of management varied widely, and those with weak project management practices experienced long delays and cost overruns. I guess, you know, there are all kinds of good examples in the private sector and in the public sector. What is the big stumbling block for our government to identify best practices and get those adopted, especially with these large IT projects?
I would say that the framework that exists has been in place since '98. Is a good one. I mean, it can be updated, but I think they do have the framework there, and they know best management practices. The problem is when they start these projects and don't apply them. It's sort of the same thing. It's we don't need more rules here. We don't need more regulation around this. We just have to use and apply what is in place. And one particular issue, too, there's obviously the capacity or human resource issues, but the whole business plan at the very beginning, which is really critical. If you don't have a good business plan, your risks of not succeeding go up significantly. And in some of these very large projects that we looked at, there were no complete business plans throughout the whole project. And even though the government asked for it 4 and 5 times, and funding would be kind of given on a temporary basis, and then it would continue, and they'd be asked for a plan. And it's a bit like you get into these things, and then they take on a life of their own. So I think there really needs to be more rigor. That's why we would have liked to have seen the analysis that done by the Treasury Board Secretariat, because they play a challenge role. And that might be something the committee would want to look at them, is how are they going to ensure that there are good business plans. And especially, I should add, too, you might want to question them, because some of the projects were actually Treasury Board Secretariat projects where we found weaknesses. So they have to ensure that for their own projects they apply this framework as well as requiring it for others.
I can see how for political reasons, when there's public pressure to get something up and running, people are waiting, say, for checks or for a particular program to get going, that there are time constraints. It seems pretty basic that if you don't know where you're going, you might end up someplace else, as Yogi Berra said, that if you don't have a good business plan, goodness gracious, you might not achieve the goals in your business plan. I guess one thing that a couple of my colleagues here have raised and that occurs to me is in our discussions around accrual accounting, taking your lead and the lead of other witnesses here, they have said the key is the showing of leadership and a front-end loading of any program with clear direction, a clear plan, lots of training, and getting people really on side, because this will involve, of course, additional investment in IT and a lot of marshalling of human resources. And it does concern me that we have not got a grip on these systems if we are moving to accrual accounting on a going forward basis, and these are the very things we need to be really on top of. So could you comment on that?
I think you're absolutely right. I think, though, we should recognize that these projects are brought in to improve services and programs to Canadians. So government does have to invest in technology. I mean, we see private sector investing significant sums of money in technology in order to improve their business practices. Government has to do the same. So there will continue to be large investments in IT because they tend to enable a lot of these improvement processes. And if government doesn't manage it well, obviously they will overspend. There could be projects that go off the rails, but perhaps more importantly, they will not have improved the services and their business practices. So they have to get much better at doing this. So I guess we need to be aware of those risks, and we need to make sure that they have a good business planning in place. And the committee could certainly help in that if they do go to the accrual accounting, by having regular, perhaps, discussions with them about what is their plan, where are they at in it, what are some of the risks that they're seeing, what are some of the difficulties they're seeing, because this will be a project over several years as well.
Thank you.
Is that it? Okay. We'll go to Monsieur Bonnet.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
See you again. Even in politics, sometimes we have occasion to say, "I told you." And I'm not saying this to you. I had a case in my office from a victim of crime that had a complaint about Corrections Canada, and I have a file this thick if you're interested. And the whole case was around reporting a complaint, and the people who the complaint was about were the ones doing the investigation, and it's one cover-up after another. And now I look at Chapter 14, I guess, Chapter 11, and you talk of Corrections Canada. As a result of this complaint, we made it a priority in my office, and I started developing private members' bills to address the issue of Corrections Canada. And I saw Corrections Canada mobilize against my private members' bills. I had more visits from them in my office. They attended committees. They did everything to kill these private members' bill. And one part of that private members' bill that they were most concerned about was the creation of a board of directors. And now we see everything that you were able to discover. When you have a complaint with Corrections Canada, they don't have a board of directors. They have one person in charge, commissioner, I think they call that person. Now, the complainant, my constituent, this mother of a victim of crime, that makes her a victim also, persisted, and I was pushing so hard here in Ottawa that all of a sudden she told me, I can't talk about it anymore. And I don't have to be a lawyer to know that they settled, they paid, and the condition is you can't talk about it anymore. And I know that they are doing a lot of this. It may be a reasonable practice, maybe the way that we address complaints in law cases, but the fact that they're not accountable to anybody makes it, I call it a crime. Because what came out of all of this, the one person in charge of Corrections Canada was moved, probably promoted, because that's how you compensate for weaknesses in a corporation this size when you don't have a board of directors. But the new person coming in doesn't have a clue what's going on around. So I'd like to ask you, I guess, 3 questions. First of all, did you find evidence of employees around the Ombudsman, or you call that person the correctional investigator, did you find evidence of perks? It's been suggested in the media, and I don't base anything on what I hear in the media, but I'm asking you if you found evidence of perks, unusual perks. And if so, have those people been charged? Has the correctional investigator been charged? And, you know, the RCMP can take 15 years to investigate this, but to me, when an audit determines unethical behavior, unethical behavior in governments is theft. Could you tell us if the correctional investigator has been charged? And can you give me some logic as to, well, I guess this is a 2-part question, some logic as to why Correction Canada would not be subject to having a board of directors oversee the operation, instead of one person with more power than the Prime Minister when it comes to talking about information in Corrections Canada, information that they refuse to give to the Minister, information that they refuse to give to anyone in Parliament. And they hide this behind the fact that it's the Privacy Act that prevents them to divulge anything about SUSAC, which was the case being transferred from maximum to medium security within 2 years when he has life, stuff like this, refusing to give information to the Minister. So I'd like to tap your expertise on, I think I know why they resist, but could you give us a bit of information as to how this would change your job if you had, you know, someone accountable to talk to, and the Minister's job, if when there is a problem, they could talk to the appointed board who would at least fear to be replaced, because the system, the way we have it now, is full of people who are promoted when they get in trouble.
Thank you, Madam Chair. On the question of the correctional investigator, on the question of were payments made to employees, we did see some inappropriate payments to employees. In fact, when it was known that there would be a surplus at the end of the year in that office, the surplus was essentially divided up amongst the employees, equal amounts to employees, but there was an effort made to then calculate the number of hours of overtime. So it was indicated that it was overtime payments, and there was a fair bit of work that would, of course, go into it because people all had different pay scales. So they would calculate the number of hours that would give them that amount of money. We do not, are not sure, though, on what basis this was presented to the employees, and government will have to decide if there's any further action that needs to be taken on that. It could have simply been presented to them as some kind of a bonus or something in the year. So to our knowledge, well, I know that the correctional investigator has not been charged to date. The file was referred to the RCMP about a year ago. I do not know if they have even begun an investigation. So that could be a question to ask them. And on the sort of governance of Corrections Canada is considered a department as any other department, so that's why it doesn't have a board of directors. It reports to a minister. And we haven't really looked at that whole question of information, but certainly I would expect that the minister would be able to get information relating to the operations within Corrections Canada.
Although they're a part of a department, they don't behave as a section of a department. They behave more as an arm's length.
Yeah,
Their operation is arm's length to the government. That I'm sure of.
I don't know why, but I mean, I can understand there are certain agencies, for example, the police forces, and they have to, there is a certain distance between government and the National Police Force.
But they have a commission.
But
they have a police
I don't know
commissioner.
why. They have a commissioner, but I would think that Corrections Canada should behave as any other department, but it could be an issue. Anyways, we could consider if we should look at that or not. But
I'm interested in knowing where
much, Ray, if you, Mr. Bonet, perhaps we can give you another turn. You're well over your time. Yes.
Wow.
Yes, I realize that. Mr. Albrecht.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Maybe I can help my colleague, Mr. Bonan, out a bit here. I want to follow that same line of thinking for just a minute. Thank you very much for the work your department does in ensuring accountability and good use of taxpayers' money. You indicated that not only was this correctional officer in the wrong for a period of 6 years, I believe, but the executive director was also aware of this situation and took no action. So just to follow up, you indicated that there may be a police investigation at some point. What recourse do we have in terms of, we can never recoup the loss of trust in government officials. Here's an ombudsman that should be above reproach in terms of his action. We can never recoup that. But what are the chances of us recouping some of the costs that were misappropriated in terms of not putting in his hours of work and billing government for travel and hospitality expenses that weren't related to his position?
Government has certainly indicated that they will undertake action to collect amounts inappropriately spent by him. We have already been contacted by the current correctional investigator. It would be his responsibility, that office, to establish the amounts that are owing. And he is working, I know, with the Treasury Board Secretariat, and that process is beginning, and there will be a claim made against the former correctional investigator, I'm pretty sure. Thank you. And could you comment on the responsibility of the executive director as well, his superior in this situation? We obviously believe that senior public servants, well, in fact, I mean, legally, every public servant has a duty under the Financial Administration Act to report any suspected cases of wrongdoing. But I think it is particularly true for senior public servants when they become aware of inappropriate behavior that they should take action. And this executive director was aware, perhaps not of all the payments, but certainly of some of the behaviors and the fact that the former correctional investigator was not always present at work, and had a duty, we believe, to report that, and as did other people probably within that office. Thank you. Could I just go on to a different thing for a few moments? Chapter 6, you talk about the old age security issues there, and you point out that the payment errors were fewer than 1% of applications, and you're pleased with that, and obviously
we should be pleased with that. However, when you look at this, the magnitude of the dollars there, with 4 million people receiving OAS now, with that expecting to double in 25 years, and currently that accounts for 14% of the budget. Clearly, there's a lot of money involved. And you also indicate that currently, or as of March 2005, there was an uncollected amount of $82 million. Again, a very large sum of money to the average Canadian. What recourse is there for government to recoup that? What current action is being taken to recoup any of those lost funds?
Let me just start by saying that you are correct that this is a very important program, both obviously in terms of need for many of these people, but in terms of size as well. And I think surprisingly to me, and probably to most Canadians, it is a very complex program. There are a lot of really technical rules for the Canadian who has lived here all their lives, turns 65 and stays here. I mean, it's fairly straightforward. But with an increase of immigration, there are a lot of technical rules about how long someone has to have been resident in Canada before and after reaching 65, and that will determine the pension amount. So, as we say, the numbers will double within the next 25 years, and I would suspect as well with an increased immigration into the country that the complexities will also change. So one of the recommendations or one of the issues that we noted is that the department doesn't have a very good system to manage quality overall. They do the tests and they see that the error rates are low, but they need to have a quality management system in place to ensure that that error rate stays low. When there are overpayments, there is action taken. They generally try to make arrangements with people to contribute a certain amount each month to pay down the debt. And I think that we mentioned in the report that, or maybe not anyways, that about half of that is estimated to be not collectible, given the circumstances of the individuals involved. One issue as well that we noted in there is that this management of these overpayments as well is not as good as it should be, and those receivables are not in the department receivable ledger, so it's sort of a separate system. It should have a little more attention given to it as well.
Am I out of time?
You still have 3 minutes.
Given the length of time that some of these efforts to recoup dollars can go on, a little uncomfortable asking this question, but would the department have recourse to the estate of someone who may have been consistently misusing these funds? Would that be one option that would be available?
I'm afraid I don't know. I can get that information for you and send it to the committee. I don't have that offhand.
Thank you.
Can I take the remaining
Certainly.
time?
You've got 2 minutes.
You've talked about the transparency or lack thereof with respect to federally funded foundations, and the Accountability Act seeks to add 20 organizations to access to information, including many foundations that are not currently covered. Do you consider this to be a positive step?
We haven't really looked at that, though we have, when we made comments on foundations in the past, indicated that several were not subject to access to information.
Yes.
Given that many involve large sums of public money, I would think that, yes, access to information, transparency around their spending would be a good thing.
We're encouraging the Senate to hurry its passage of this expansion of access to information. Secondly, you noted in a previous report, I think it was October, November, with respect to environmental programs that the previous government was financing and the lack of targets, the lack of achievable results. And this was done in conjunction with the Environment Commissioner. Have you seen, is this, I'm looking at the Sustainable Development Technology Canada, you make complaints about or observations about the lack of transparency here with that regard. Is it part of the same theme that monies that were allotted by the previous government for so-called environmental programs lacked transparency, their goals were unclear, and objectives were not articulated?
No, the issue that we have here with regards Sustainable Development Technology Canada was a clause that was inserted by the Treasury Board Secretariat, which said that that if it was a meeting at which the federally appointed directors formed the majority, they couldn't make a decision.
Yeah.
So it really hampered their ability to function effectively as a board. And this was done, I think, for various other reasons which are mentioned in the report, but it doesn't have anything to do with their program objectives.
We'll go to Mr. Algabra.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good to see you again, Madam Fraser. You've become a regular here, and we enjoy having you.
With pleasure.
I have to say first that I'm heartened by the work your office does. It's a sign of strong democracy at work that always tries to correct itself. We all know in an organization as big as the federal government, there will be errors and deliberate mistakes, and we need somebody to oversee or make sure that these errors are not repeated or are not made. And my question to you is about how do we set a system that makes this monitoring much more frequent and much more immediate, i.e. perhaps some performance indices, some permanent offices within the department. Again, a lot of my colleagues here have been using their personal experience, and I tell you from my experience in the private sector, there are accounting auditors, and their counterweight or the person that oversees the performance of accounting within a department or agency is a controller. There are quality assurance auditors, and there are people that oversee the performance of quality assurance by quality assurance managers, and so on and so forth. How do we? There might be a systemic issue here that we can fix or we can improve on, and I know some people alluded to the surplus. Maybe that is a symptom, but I think it's much more mechanical or technical than that. And do you have any thoughts on that?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would just like to echo that our objective in doing these audits is to help improve management and give assurance to parliamentarians about whether important systems and practices are working well or if there needs to be improvements. On the whole question of monitoring, the performance measurement is critical to that, and do departments have in place good performance measures? And I think we need to all recognize that performance measurement in government, in a public sector, is much more complicated than it is in the private sector. Private sector, the measures are largely financial, tend to be earnings per share or stock price. And so the systems are perhaps easier in a way. As well, in government, a lot of the programs will take a very long time before you actually see the results. And it's difficult for government to always, there's the question of attribution. Was it government's actions that reduced, for example, poverty, or was it other factors? So it is very complex to do that. Nevertheless, I think that's why it is so important. We've done a number of audits over the years on performance measurement. The government has made good progress, I'd say generally over, say, the last 10 years, but seems to have sort of stalled lately. In the last few years, we note that they aren't making the same kind of progress. And if I can be so bold, I think there needs to be more attention by parliamentarians. The departments produce a lot of this information. I think, honestly, a lot of people will say, and parliamentarians will say, too, that the reviews of those documents are not being done for good and valid reasons. And if I can make the comparison with the private sector, when you buy a share in a company, everybody receives the annual report and the financial statements. I'm not sure everybody reads those cover to cover. You have a stockbroker that does the analysis for you and basically says, buy or sell, or here's our recommendation. And I question if parliamentarians don't kind of need a more rigorous analysis section, be it through Library of Parliament or others. I know there's been discussion around that could help them do the analysis of the performance reports, and then they would be better able to question and to query departments about their performance. So I think it's something that, we have to look at, and it has to be resolved, but there needs to be the pull from parliamentarians in order to improve the performance measurement system in government as well.
Yeah, I mean, I will acknowledge the fact that parliamentarians are overwhelmed typically with the amount of information they receive, whether they're dealing with constituents issues, whether they're dealing with legislation, whether they're dealing with performance government. And I think probably the same apply to a CEO of a large corporation. And that's why what they do is they try to delegate or divide up the responsibility, and then have individuals or organizations or departments responsible and accountable for the performance of certain indices. And that's what I was wondering if there, I mean, yes, I will certainly agree with you. The ideal situation is to have parliamentarians dedicate a lot more time to these issues. But the reality is that we probably need some mechanism to help us do that.
Yes, I'd say within government the mechanisms are there. I mean, the Treasury Board Secretariat essentially plays the kind of management board role, and there is the role of the Controller General as well. And within departments, they all have their groups that do these performance reports. So I think the mechanisms are there. There probably needs to be more attention paid to it, perhaps more rigor, and I would suspect probably more investment as well. Be it in terms of systems or people. But there needs to be better information. Now, government has certainly indicated that they want to go forward with some kind of regular review of programs, and in order to do that well, they will need that performance information. So I'm hopeful that this movement to trying to get a better expenditure management system will require much better performance information.
I just want to make a short comment. I want to go on the record by saying I think part of that process will be going to accrual accounting, because it will also help us examine the financial performance of the department. Thank you.
Thank you. Monsieur Nadeau.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I almost want to ask Mr. Campbell if Scotland is a nation like Quebec, and I think I know the answer to that, so I won't go any further. Ms. Fraser, one chapter that I'm particularly interested in is Chapter 5. And in your comments, you say at one point that contracts that were awarded under this chapter, I think it's the issue of relocating members of the Canadian Forces, the RCMP, and Federal Public Service. You say that contracts are not awarded fairly among the different agencies that, or the different corporations that were attempting to provide this service. Could you explain that a bit? Yes, certainly. There was a mistake in the call for proposals. Some people, when they relocate, keep their homes, and they need management services for that. And we indicated, or it was indicated in the request for proposals, that there were 7,200 people a year who needed these management services. Some companies called into question that figure, stating that there were some anomalies or some inconsistencies in the request. They felt that the figure was too high, and that is a figure that was provided by the Department of Public Works. In actual fact, it was 180 over 6 years, so that's about 30 per year rather than 7,200, which was the inaccurate figure. So the person who would have been awarded the contract, or who had been accorded the contract previously, was aware of the real volume and had quoted 0 for those services, whereas another person quoted millions. Of course, we'd have to look at hypotheticals in order to see what the difference would have been, but it was mainly stated by us that it was an unfair process because the person who held the contract was aware of the actual volume, and when potential providers called into question this amount, that amount was maintained. there seems to be a gap, a huge gap. And in your findings under Chapter 5, you say that the Treasury Board Secretariat, neither the Secretariat nor other concerned or involved organizations had created a performance mechanism to show that the program's goals had been reached. Is that related to what you were stating? Not really. It is a program that was established, and we thought it was at first to reduce government expenditures. There should have been an evaluation assessment of services. Assessments are made of services that are delivered to people who are relocating. But there should also have been an assessment as to whether the program was reaching the goals and the savings that we had expected. All right, and on that point, can we expect that at some point Secretary of Treasury Board Secretariat and other agencies will be doing this, accomplishing these goals? Well, it was agreed that yes, that was the objective. I think they stated that they were in agreement with the recommendation, but to my knowledge, they have not provided a specific response. So they haven't shown any signs. Okay. Let's make some assumptions here. In other words, I won't make any statements or claims. As to relocating members of the Canadian Forces, the RCMP, and the Federal Public Service, there are competitors who've gone so far as to say that there were conflicts of interest that could perhaps serve to explain why the Royal Lepage company was chosen. Do you have any information about that, or is that just too tricky? Well, we haven't seen any indication of that. We do know that when the contract was initially awarded, there was a complaint to the effect that there was an official who had traveled with representatives from Royal LePage, and the government stated that there was an appearance of a conflict of interest. They bid once again, and we simply looked at the second bid and were unable to see any indication of a conflict of interest. All right. Okay. Well, the question does date back to 2002, if I'm not mistaken, and there were several things that happened in the meantime. Now, I'd like to understand, you see, because I'm learning things as well on this while sitting on this committee, in terms of management, in terms of risk management, and I think we're going beyond risk management in terms of the inaccurate figures that you referred to and other points. And in referring to your findings or your recommendations, do you think it would be warranted for the RCMP to go to look at this issue a little more in depth when you look at 7,200 as opposed to 30 services rendered? I'm trying to understand the scope of this issue. I don't think it calls for a criminal investigation, but it seems, according to all indications, that it is a mistake. It was a mistake in the first call for proposal, and when they bid again, they did it very quickly, and they didn't really take the time. All right. I think you went beyond your time. I'm sorry.
Chairperson, and thanks, Ms. Fraser, for coming in. We always appreciate your visits. I just want to play a little bit of cleanup here. I just want to continue with one of the lines of questioning that Mr. Nadeau was involved in. You commented that some of the members of the Canadian Armed Forces have been overcharged for services provided to them. I'm wondering if you could just update us as to what action has been taken thus far on that front.
That is correct. Effectively, on these management services, when the bid was zero, they should not have paid. They were actually charged. And this is not the department, it's the members of the forces, the individuals who pay for these services. We brought this to the attention of the department. To our knowledge, they have not been reimbursed at this point. I think that might be a question if ever the committee is interested in pursuing this further to ask the departments exactly what they are planning to do, because while they agreed with us, and they agreed with it and said they would do a review, we're not aware that it has been done or those people have been reimbursed so far.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm just wondering, I'll continue on the line of questioning that Mr. Ogabra had started. I'm wondering about the idea of moving forward on a performance measurement system, something that would accentuate or build up the process to ensure that parliamentarians and Canadians are finding out if their civil service and if the government in general is working effectively, and the measurement system, or to ensure that a measurement system is in place that will give an accurate reading. I'm wondering if you could give some idea as to what you'd like to see in that type of a system.
I'd be glad, Madam Chair, to refer the committee back to some of the previous reports we've done on performance measurement and the performance reports that departments produce. There is a system in place. We obviously have recommendations on how to improve it. I think there are areas that need improvement in it, and I think, as I mentioned earlier, we saw that there was a fair bit of it. The government made a lot of advancement and seems to have sort of stalled in the last few years on the improvement in that. The issue we're raising in this particular report is not so much the performance reporting of the departments as a whole, but when programs come in, when there's review of spending, it tends to be only on the new programs. Existing spending isn't reviewed on a regular basis. Government has certainly indicated that they want to look at this and done their own study and have come up with the same conclusions as us. So there needs to be some sort of cyclical review of programs using good performance information.
Well, yeah, I do agree, and I do believe that this committee will play an important role. I'm hoping in that review system. I guess what maybe we should do as a committee, and I don't know if you would encourage us to do, is look at ways from this committee's opinion as to how we might be able to move forward and ensure that there's effective
Absolutely. And I'm sure the Treasury Board Secretariat as well would be more than happy to explain to you how they do the performance measurement system and the review as well.
Perfect. Well, you know, Chapter 12, you talk about the issue of the foundation that was set up in terms of the environmental foundation. And, of course, you know, we on the government side have been quite concerned as to the train wreck that the previous government was engaged in terms of the environmental record. And I know you shouldn't probably comment, but I'm wondering if you were able to look at value for dollars. There was $550 million that was allocated to that foundation. I'm wondering if there's any ability for you to go in there and find out value for money for those dollars that were spent.
In fact, that foundation was part of the audits done by the Commissioner of the Environment, and there's a report. It's reported in her report that came out this past September, and we found, in fact, that they had good performance. I'm just trying to remember offhand. They had good performance measures. There was still early days, obviously, for some of these foundations, but it was our report on the foundation was generally a positive one on its management.
Because I did read part of that report, and of course there was a lot of discussion in that report that how, you know, if or not some of these foundations were working well. The general consensus was from that report that the previous government was not any closer to implementing Kyoto than it had been when it signed on. And so I'm just wondering, in terms of the broader spectrum, as to if we can actually consider value for money, if in fact the larger objective was never, you know, we weren't ever any closer to reaching that objective. And as a matter of fact, I mean, the report said that we were further away than we had been when we signed on to the treaty. So I'm just wondering if, in the broader scheme, if there's any way to find out if there's actually value for money, if in fact we're further away from the broader scheme or the broader idea.
The Commissioner's report clearly indicated that the targets would not be met unless there was, you know, and I think even with some serious action, the targets would not be met. When we get into issues of value for money, that's really evaluation, which is not work that we do, and that, of course, is up to parliamentarians to decide ultimately if there was value for money there or not.
I think Mr. Polyev just has a...
Very much. You've had your 5 minutes, sir.
You.
Monsieur Bonnet.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
That we deal with errors and misbehavior by promoting. The only reason I said that is because if you look at page 448 of the book On the Take and the Airbus investigation, the bureaucrat at that time was Chagite, and we know the rest of the story. So, I have a short question. It's on the sharing of surpluses again. What surpluses? Because and why I'm asking this is because in my case that I had, the response to the complaint from the victim of crime read more like a form letter than a result of an investigation. And if they cut investigations and ended up with a surplus and then shared it with their friends, the victims of that are the victims of crime. If it's in the staffing budget that they shared the surpluses by keeping staff low and at the end of the year having surpluses, I'm interested in finding out if you know which surpluses they were sharing.
No, we don't have that information. All we know is at the end of the year they were expecting a surplus, but from what post or what account, we don't have that information.
In your eyes, it would be the department surplus then?
This office was separate from Corrections Canada, so it had its own budget, and it would have been within that budget.
So it could be surpluses from butching or not doing investigations and just not spending the money that is required to investigate. Because if you have a complaint from someone in Sudbury, maybe you should go see that person. And if you don't spend to go see that person, the complainant, the victim, then you're sure you're going to have a surplus.
Yeah,
you can't tell.
I don't know.
But it could.
Yeah.
Thank you. That's all.
Monsieur Poilievre.
Yes, building on the report that you presented and that the Environment Commissioner contributed to, so it was your conclusion and the Environment Commissioner's conclusion that we were not en route to meet the Kyoto targets?
That's correct.
Okay. So even given the programs that were introduced in the dying days of the previous government, there was nothing to indicate that those targets would have been achieved?
Well, I wish I had her report with me and I could actually quote it to you, but my recollection is that her report was very clear that the targets would not be met, though she did point to some programs which were successful, were achieving the results. I seem to recall the Enter Guide program was one. And that there were some, basic elements in place to be successful going forward.
Right. And that program, of course, had administration costs in the range of 50% plus. But during the time that the previous government signed Kyoto, to the time it left office, greenhouse gases increased by 35% above Kyoto targets and increased at twice the rate as in the United States during the exact same time period. And the Environment Commissioner found that the programs introduced by the Liberal Environment Minister at the time, Mr. Dion, did not set clear objectives or point to clear results. And according to the Environment Commissioner, the Kyoto objectives were not going to be met. So how do you, I guess I'm looking for your advice because all of us are trying to tackle the questions of climate change, smog reduction, other environmental objectives. How do we design programs that will produce clear results, that will, first of all, set clear objectives, clear obtainable objectives that can be achieved, and then how do we ensure that they actually produce the results that they are intended to produce?
I think this is a very political discussion in which I would prefer not to engage.
Okay, well, it's also a very factual one. I see I'm eliciting some excitement from my colleagues across the way. I seem to have struck a nerve with them. But back to the question of foundations, can you describe some of the challenges you've had in trying to examine the value for money when you're investigating foundations?
Over the years, we have raised a number of concerns about foundations and the accountability of foundations. We raised concerns initially about their reporting to Parliament, which were addressed. They all now produce annual reports. We had concerns as well about our ability to audit, and that was modified. Our mandate was changed in the Budget Implementation Bill of 2005, which gave us the right to audit foundations. We have now included the Sustainable Development Technology Foundation in the Commissioner's report, and we have 2 other audits coming which will also include foundations, one on research and development, which includes the Canadian Foundation for Innovation, and one on support to students, which includes the Millennium Scholarship Fund. So our concerns are largely addressed at this point.
Good. That's excellent. Good. As I mentioned earlier, it's our hope that foundations will become increasingly transparent as they are added to access to information, and they are among the 20 organizations, actually 30 organizations, sorry, that the Accountability Act adds to access to information. And so we're looking forward to that transparency. Any more questions from colleagues? We have Mr. Cramp.
I think the 5 minutes are up. I'll get back to you afterwards. Madame Thibault.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Madame
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ms. Fraser, the comments that you included in your report in order to reassure citizens and the public, they're essential. You say that there are some cases that are discouraging, and I have to admit that it can be discouraging to be sitting here, but to blame over 300,000 people, that's another matter entirely. But when you look at Chapter 11, it's a horror story in that no matter how you look at management, physical property, say, for instance, a car, the way in which you manage human resources, the way they managed financial resources, and I'm not trying to discourage anybody else, but the fact is that he was not the only one, was he? There were other people at some point who must have filled out forms and must have realized that they didn't have evidence, that they didn't have, that the registry had to be redone, and that they were being asked to do certain things and they didn't necessarily know what to do with that. And it's like in the Army, you have to obey your commanding officer, and it leads us to that issue of ethics. I was wondering if you had any thoughts on the following. Assuming that the act to protect protect those who disclose wrongdoings is implemented, if that type of thing had been implemented, then perhaps this could have been avoided. Over the last Parliament, there were a number of officials and heads of organizations who told us that they didn't really need that whistleblower legislation because it already existed, things were going really well, values were well known, the notions of ethics were understood. But no matter how small a unit may be, when something this serious occurs, well, that's when the public says, what is this issue of ethics? Where are the ethics in government? And of course that touches us a great deal, it affects us. And in the future, could this mean that we could avoid these types of situations? Or am I being deluded in assuming that? Obviously, the legislation will exist, and for some whistleblowers, it will afford them some protection. I remain skeptical on this, and I think that the idea of resorting to the legislation is an indication, in a way, that the system has failed. Employees must feel comfortable reporting on situations which they believe are inappropriate. They shouldn't feel like they need to ask for legal protection in order to do that. And what we see here, and I think this is the most troubling aspect of it, is the fact that it was able to go on for so long, and there were clear indications to the fact that unethical behavior was going on. The fact that no one reported on that for so long, you see, I think there was a interesting, there's a situation that goes on with these small agencies that play the role of ombudsman, because departments and central agencies are reluctant to increase their oversight because they're afraid of being accused of interfering in their affairs. And I think there may be something there that led to this state of affairs. That being said, I think it's a concern. And when you look at the other chapter on agencies, public safety agencies, I think staff or employees are not aware of the fact, or maybe they don't think that higher officials are going to take action. They're afraid that they may not be respected by their colleagues, and that is maybe an indication as to why no one's referring to these, no one's talking about this. You referred to being skeptical, if I'm not mistaken. And if we look at 4.15 under Chapter 4, you say that no more than half of staff, or approximately half of staff, and you refer to small organizations. You're referring to the Canadian Border Services Agency, which is dear to my heart. And that is concerning. The investigation was done between June and October of 2005. If people don't believe in this, even though the legislation is in place, even if C2 is in place, it won't change anything to the matter, because people have to feel like they're involved and they've got a part to play. In most organizations and departments, I guess I would imagine there's still that internal audit function, isn't there? Yes. And we do realize there's a difference between that internal audit function and your role. There's a role for that internal audit function. But should we expect that under their responsibilities, we should get disclosure of these types of things slightly before you do disclose these things in the course of your reporting on and offering an annual report? For these small agencies, they often don't have that internal audit function. Now, because they're too small, the Auditor General now does help them. I know that they are now starting to carry out some work, and for some of the departments, the larger departments, they all have to have the internal audit function. For those of our audits that are making the news in a way, some of these internal audit functions or representatives have been able to report on these issues before we did.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Ms. Fraser, I'd like to move on to Chapter 8 on allocations to Health Canada. And the review of the enforcement responsibilities of Health Canada is an area that is of interest to Canadians because, of course, Health Canada is responsible for overseeing the enforcement of a number of products and devices that Canadians depend on to be reliable. You talk about blood monitoring equipment, cribs, pharmaceuticals, a variety of things. And One of your concerns was that there may not have been sufficient funding given to the regulatory arm of Health Canada in order to adequately perform its regulatory enforcement functions. And I did note in Chapter 8 that that there were, I guess, cuts to spending so that there was less funding for core activities in this responsibility in the budget year 05 to 06, and there was in 03 to 04. What assurance can you give Canadians that in spite of the less than adequate funding for its regulatory responsibilities, that Health Canada is performing its enforcement of this regulatory responsibility in a way that fully ensures the protection of Canadians?
All I can really do, Madam Chair, is to repeat what the department told us, and if the committee is interested, I think that would be a question that the department itself should elaborate more on. But what they indicated to us was that they focused their efforts on the areas of highest risk, and so obviously believe that they are covering the greatest risk. You will note in the report that we do have interviews with program managers who are concerned about the lack of funding, though as I've said, I would presume that every program manager will tell you that they need more money. But it is a little troubling, I think, in the regulatory programs. And we would have expected Health Canada to have clearly articulated what level of activity was required for each one of the regulatory programs, and that then the resources would be determined based on that. They do not have that information, though they have indicated to us that for the next year in their operational plans they will begin to do that.
I know you do indicate here that the complexity and the growing demands on the regulatory arm of Health Canada would indicate a need for growing funding, greater funding, not less. So in spite of the propensity of many managers to want to have greater spending, because there are always additional needs they like to fulfill, it does seem that our funding decisions have moved us in the opposite direction to the needs of Canadians. And while I appreciate that they would want to focus, the programs would want to focus on the areas of greatest risk, surely there are other areas for which there are regulations where there is risk, although perhaps not the greatest risk, and I wonder how we can be assured that the risks are not of a nature that Canadians should be concerned about.
I would like to point out too, though, that it's not just a question of additional funding, but it could also be changing the way that they carry out their regulatory activities. We didn't look at it specifically in this report, but we did an audit of the regulation of the medical material about medical devices, 2 years ago about? And one of the recommendations we made was that they might want to do more work in harmonizing with other countries rather than Canada always conducting all of the reviews, that perhaps they could rely on reviews done by others and focus more on the post-market activities, which is the testing and the reporting. So there can be ways that they change as well how they carry out the regulatory activities. But again, it comes back to knowing what does the department feel they should be doing in order to meet those regulatory responsibilities, and then the funding is obviously a consequence of that.
Now, I notice there are a number of areas where information seem to be lacking, such as having the baseline information as you described, and having clear plans going forward. There are a number of areas where they needed to get greater information in order to really understand how much funding they actually did need. And I notice the commitment of the federal government is to get this all in place by the 07-08 budget year. And I guess my question to you is that the most reasonably expeditious time frame possible? And again, are there assurances that in the meantime, Canadians will be protected and Health Canada will be fulfilling its responsibilities?
I think that's a very reasonable response. In fact, a lot of the funding submissions are going in now, so they will have to get this done very soon. I mean, we're only, 3-4 months away from the beginning of the 07-08 year. So they've indicated that they want to move in that direction, and I think that's a reasonable, it's a actually very good target for them to meet.
All right, thank you.
Mr. Cramp for 2 minutes, and then Mr. Albrecht for the balance.
Madam Fraser, many departments, agencies, ministries actually sort of not live in fear, but there's a lot of trepidation when they hear they might have of course, an external audit done by the AG's department. But on the other side of the coin, there is a positive, because a lot of times your investigations don't just reveal wrongdoing, but actually identify positives so that we can carry forward. In that vein, do you see any merit in, and not just expanding your scope and your departmental purview just across the board, but there are many, many agencies and or areas that could be affected that will never see the light of day or even the threat of audit? We're just so broad scope. Do you see a possibility of almost not a lottery process, but almost a SWOT approach on a random, if there's 34 areas of investigation, one year we're just going to pull out this one. The next year, and totally at random, so the departments could not plan on necessarily being audited and or not, and or agencies audited and or not. Someone might get audited twice in a row. This just might put the entire, I suppose, structure, bureaucracy, just on notice that they are going to be held accountable potentially at any particular time. Do you see any merit in that? Almost like a SWOT approach?
Well, we, in a way, I wouldn't say we use a SWOT approach, but I think all the departments and agencies in government know that they could become the subject of audit. Obviously, there are certain areas that we will probably never get to, certainly not within a 5 or 10 year, but all of the larger departments are audited on a regular basis, and we're starting to do more work as well in the smaller agencies. So, and of course, if, as in the case here with the correctional investigator, I mean, we do get complaints that come in, and when we analyze them and think that it's meritorious of a look, we will go in. So,
but even from a deterrence factor, 15th of January, we're going to pull a new one for next year. It is this little department there. That could make the rounds of the system and sort of put everybody on notice. Just a thought. I realize it might appear to be a little side point. Mr. Albrecht.
Mr. Albrecht.
Such an interesting topic, Madam Chair, that I almost hesitate to go into my question, but just very briefly, and I know we don't have time to delve into it deeply, but in Chapter 7, you talk about the BC treaty process, and the statement you make is the government needs to rethink its strategies based on a realistic timeline. Are you implying that they have an overly optimistic view of what could be done? Are their resources stretched beyond anything that we could possibly manage? Maybe just some comments on what you see as a realistic timeline.
When the treaty process was established in 1993, the expectation was that all the treaties would be signed by 2000, the year 2000. We're in 2006, one has been initialed. And in fact, I was at BC and met with the Summit of BC Chiefs just on this past Friday. They indicated that many of the treaties that have been signed took anywhere from 20 to 25 years. So it is, I think we have to recognize that it is a complicated, complex issue. It will take time, and the department has to change their management structure to manage according to a much longer time frame than was initially expected.
You don't have any specific recommendations to make?
I have no specific recommendation, no.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Alghabra for our final question.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Follow up on my previous line of thinking. There are, I think, a process of internal audits. Is that correct? How effective are those internal audits, and do you have any thoughts on the effectiveness and how we can make them stronger?
In fact, we do. We did an audit internal audit about 2 years ago on the function across government. The main conclusion we had of that is that it needed to be more professionalized, more training, people with better skills. There was even an issue around the classification for internal auditors. So there were a number of recommendations that came out of that, and government responded to that. Now, we haven't gone back and done a follow-up. And I think not surprisingly, the level of quality varied significantly across the departments that we looked at. Some I think are recognized as being very good, others not quite as good.
I don't know, maybe there is, but is there a forum for internal auditors where they share best practices or they communicate?
Yes, there is a center, what we call a Center for Excellence in the Treasury Board Secretariat under the Comptroller General, and they have been working at developing, best practices and exchanges, doing that kind of work with internal audits.
And is that proceeding to your liking? I know there are some areas of improvement, like you touched upon, but
we've certainly seen activity. We haven't gone back to do a follow-up to actually assess how that is being translated into action in the departments. But that might be an issue as well if the committee wanted to pick up with the Comptroller General.
And who do they report to, internal auditors? What's their reporting structure?
Within the departments, they will report to the Deputy Minister in most cases.
Directly to the Deputy
Yes.
Minister? Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Fraser. I think you've come before us at a most opportune time. I can tell you, as the committee will know, that we're nearing the end of our work on the accrual accounting report. And your being here today also gives us perhaps some ideas, as I will ask the committee to consider what we would like to study in the new year when we do finish our report. At this point, we're scheduled to look at the final or the draft document on Thursday, perhaps work on it again on Tuesday, but I will say to all the committee members here, if we finish the accrual accounting report on Thursday, perhaps we could have a meeting on Tuesday to look at where we're going and what we'd like to do in the new year, and we'll see what happens there. So thank you very, very much.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
And I'll declare the meeting over.